Greetings. I am the Doctor, and with me is Dr. Tiny. It is both a happy and a sad day here at Commedia dell'Arts and Crafts, because today was the day we released Squeaky back into the wild. We had intended to do it a couple days ago, but the last couple days were raining, and we thought he would have a better chance if he had at least a few days to get used to the outdoors before he got wet. Now, for those of you who need a little catch-up, Squeaky is a house sparrow that my husband found near the beginning of August as a nestling just outside the castle. And we weren't able to get it back into his nest, so we ended up taking him in, and I have been looking after him. And we have 2 previous videos, one with his first week as a nestling, his second as a fledgling, and this week he will be, this week's episode is Squeaky as a juvenile house sparrow. No, I never did find out what Squeaky's actual sex is, because a juvenile looks like a female. Like, the coloring is similar, so we wouldn't know for a while, whether his coloring would change or stay the same. And I was not going to keep him that long, because juvenile sparrows are perfectly capable of leaving the nest, surviving on their own. So, yes, it was a much quieter experience with Squeaky as a juvenile. He was much more interested in seeds, so he was able to feed himself whenever he wanted to, rather than yelling for me to give him some mealworms or soggy cat food. By the 3rd week, he didn't want the soggy cat food at all. He wanted either seeds or mealworms, so I would give him a few mealworms at different points of the day, but most of the time he was happy to peck at his seeds. Yes, and he did manage to breach containment a couple of times. Fortunately, overnight, I leave my office door closed, precisely for that purpose, in case he was able to get out of the cat carrier. So, early last week, I had gone to my office early and found a very smug little sparrow fluttering around. Because the cat carrier, it's a soft-bodied cat carrier, so it doesn't, close completely. So while there's not enough space for a cat to escape, a determined and clever little sparrow might be able to wiggle out. The other time was I was carrying the cat carrier into the bathroom to change out the newspapers and let Squeaky have a little fly around, but he was not wanting to wait, so a small brown blur hit me in the stomach at top speed, but by then we were already in the bathroom, so he didn't really get anywhere. In this 3rd week, I also started letting Squeaky have time to fly around in my office and not just the bathroom, since, I felt he needed a little more space and a little more challenge. My office isn't huge, but there are more surfaces to land on and, more things to, more challenges to explore. And I would be letting him out for longer and longer just to let him exercise, test his wings, practice landing on different surfaces. Yes, he did find a favorite spot in my office, which was sort of tucked in among some of Jester's craft supplies. There's a stack of felt and some little containers of screws and things. And Squeaky thought that this was a good place for a little sparrow to hang out when he was, taking a rest from fluttering around. And, much as, there is a temptation to play with him because he is small and cute, I did continue to keep my interactions to a minimum so that he wouldn't get used to humans. The only times I picked him up were to put him back in the cat carrier or to check on his leg. Squeaky's right leg doesn't work, really from the, what would be the ankle down. He probably damaged the joint when he fell out of his nest initially. I have been keeping an eye on it. He still can't really put weight on that foot. I think it's probably going to be like that forever. It does look like the joint does look a little better than it did earlier, like there had been more swelling before and it's, gone down. The joint still looks, noticeably thicker than the left. Yes, the right ankle looks noticeably thicker than the left ankle, but it's not discolored. It's, less swollen than it had been. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't hurt him particularly. So if I'm holding him and, testing his joint, he will yell, but if I poke him anywhere, he will yell. It doesn't seem to be more pained than normal poking. And, it's been, quite fascinating these last 3 weeks. I've never really been, a bird person. I will admire them if I see them out on the street. And I enjoy pigeons for, I think they're cute. Various other birds are pretty and all that, but, it's not one of my specialities of learning. And I've had to learn quite a lot about house sparrows and, animal rehab in the last 3 weeks. That has been, interesting. And learning new things is always good. I definitely appreciate sparrows more than I did. I've always enjoyed, they're cute little creatures. I like watching them splash around in the puddle out back. I will admire them sitting on the wires out in the courtyard. But, seeing one up close, interacting with one for 3 weeks, I have more of an appreciation of, how small they are. It's just, really quite incredible to realize that this is a living creature, and he's tiny. And he can do all these things like fly. And, how delicate he is. Like, I know, birds have hollow bones, but you don't really think about that until you're, holding a sparrow and holding, his tiny little leg and trying to flex it. And you realize just, how small and, how delicate this little thing is. And, how, the feather, again, the feathers are small, but they're perfect. It's, I don't know. I just really like nature, okay? So, yes, and he never, Squeaky never appreciated being picked up. He would bite and squeak, and, that is what I wanted from him. I didn't want to be a Disney princess, holding out my hand for him to perch on. I would, grab him like a claw machine, gently, and put him where I needed to put him. So, as I said, today I released him out into the courtyard. And, I had thought that since I'd only ever seen him, flutter around because he's been indoors, that, maybe he'd fly into one of the nearby bushes and, sit there just to kind of get a feel for being outside, or, go sit on the roof or something, kind of get into the eaves. But what he did was, as soon as the carrier top was open and he saw the sky, he knew what it was for. He took off like a shot. There was no hesitation, no looking back. He was up and out and over the trees. Just, if I had worried that he wouldn't know how to fly strongly because I'd only ever seen him flutter, I didn't need to. He knew what he wanted, and it was out. And, that's really the ideal for that. He is a wild animal. He knows that he's wild. This isn't, a little outdoor pet story. This is he's gone to go do sparrow things. Now, you may ask, why, what are his chances? Now, I've done the best I could for him as a human. I could keep him warm and fed. I, gave him little perches and time to fly around to encourage sparrow behaviors. I taught him that seeds are tasty, that bugs are tasty. But, I didn't really need to teach him anything. I just needed to give him, the tools he needed to just do sparrow things. Like, he could preen on his own. I never taught him that. He knew, he figured out perching just by, having a perch in there. He figured out flying just because he wanted up. So he seems to be a very clever little creature. And obviously a very strong flyer if his first act out in the wild was to go over some rather tall trees. But yes, sparrows are small prey animals. In the wild, they have about a 20 to 25% chance of reaching their first breeding stage. And then after that, as they get older, it goes up to 40 to 60%. So it's just like, you may wonder why I put that much work in for a 20 to 25% chance, but that is 20 to 25% higher than the 0% chance that Squeaky would have had if we had just left him on the ground, where there's no shelter, no food, and clumsy or cruel human feet. This was a busy street. So, I've done what I can, and the rest is up to Squeaky. I will be keeping an eye out for any sparrows with a damaged leg out in the courtyard, but I mean, he could be anywhere by now, and I am quite proud of his progress. So, until next time, stay hydrated.